Transgender, denoting or relating to a person whose sense of personal identity or gender does not correspond with their gender assigned at birth. In the past year, 48% of trans people have thought seriously about suicide. 28% have made plans to kill themselves, compared to 1.1% of the general population. In their lifetime, 82% of trans people have thought seriously about suicide. 40% have attempted suicide, compared to 4.6% of the general population.
I had suffered from anxiety and depression as a direct result of gender dysphoria. This caused me to become more and more unable to function in society as time went on. Only when my state expanded Medicaid was I finally able to start dealing with all of these issues so I could become a productive member of society.
Does being trans cause these mental health disparities?
The minority stress theory proposes that sexual and gender minority health disparities can be explained in large part by stressors induced by a hostile, homophobic culture, which often results in a lifetime of harassment, maltreatment, discrimination, and victimization, and may ultimately impact access to care.
It's well known amongst the mental health community that stress plays a really big role in the rates of mental illness that people experience. There's a lot of things that contribute to mental health, including such as genetics and how you grew up and how you deal with stress, but the experience of stress itself definitely plays a large role in the mental health that people experience. For example, depression is only 40% heritable, meaning that there's another 60% that's up to environmental factors, and stress is another big one that includes in the environmental factors that affect the rates of depression that people experience. And so it makes sense that the stress that trans people experience on a day-to-day basis from stigma and discrimination would contribute directly to these disparities of mental health amongst trans people versus the general population. Children who are socially transitioned amongst their peers and families and accepted for the gender that they most identify with report the same rates of depression as their peers. And trans people who have been out for 10 or more years report significantly less serious psychological distress than trans people who have only been out for a year. And those who are out report significantly less psychological distress than those who are not out and want to be. The serious psychological distress that trans people experience is only worsened by the harassment and discrimination that trans people experience from mental health providers themselves.
Multiple medical professionals have misgendered me, denied to me that I was transgender, or tried to persuade me that my trans identity was just a misdiagnosis of something else, have made jokes at my expense in front of me and behind my back, and have made me feel physically unsafe. I often do not seek medical attention when it is needed because I'm afraid of what harassment or discrimination I may experience in a hospital or clinic.
Many trans people are not believed or are pressured into detransitioning. 13% of trans people have reported that a mental health professional, such as a counselor or a psychologist, has tried to stop them from being trans.
1 out of 3 trans people are denied health care for being trans. 28% of trans people have reported harassment in healthcare. 50% of trans people have reported needing to teach healthcare providers about trans healthcare.
The pressure put on trans people to detransition doesn't work, and the majority of those who have detransitioned have done so only temporarily, and 62% of those who have detransitioned are currently living as the gender that they were not assigned at birth, and instead as their transgender identity. Trans people who have experienced this pressure are far more likely to be experiencing serious psychological distress than those who are not.
77% of trans people said they want counseling for transition, but only 58% have ever received the desired counseling.
I have struggled with depression and anxiety ever since puberty. I failed classes, isolated myself, and considered suicide because of this. A year ago, I felt hopeless and had daily suicidal thoughts, but today I've got a plan for the future and haven't had a serious suicidal thought in months. I firmly believe this is because of my transition. I feel so much more comfortable and happy than I've ever been.
So how do we even out these mental health disparities between the trans population and the general population? Believe trans people. Trans people are not faking their experience, and the majority of the mental health disparities that they experience come directly from the stigma and discrimination that they face on day-to-day life. And the pressure to detransition is more harmful than it is helpful. Give trans people social support. Studies suggest that trans people who have social support have significantly lower rates of mental health issues than those who do not. And social support can help trans people cope with the stigma of their minority status. Educate, educate, educate. Too many trans people are expected to go through the labor of educating mental health professionals rather than the mental health professionals understanding trans needs in advance, something that is not expected of the general population. Love and listen to your trans peers, your trans clients, your trans family members. Trans people are everywhere, and trans people, for the most part, know what they need, know what they want, and their voices are not being heard and are instead being harassed. If you give your support and listen to them, trans people will speak. So listen to what they have to say and welcome them with open arms. Make sure you're educated, and make sure at the end of the day that you understand that trans people are people and that they are not wrong.